Check. And hello, Steeler Nation, and welcome to your SteelerNation.com podcast. I'm your host, G.Stryker, and today we welcome one of our up-and-coming sports writers from right here at SteelerNation.com, Zach Herbaugh. Zach, how you doing, man?
Good, man. I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited.
Hey, I'm happy to have you, man, because I know we've only been working together for just a few months now, but
Right.
I really like and enjoy getting all of the newest reporters back, so I get to know them. You know, I enjoy getting to know everyone. So I had Jordan on earlier, and now you're the next of the new guys up. So welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, man.
Yeah, no worries. So we have some breaking news here that I wanted to talk about. We know it from our thread because we have all the reporters are on a specific thread for Steeler Nation, and I want to share this with all of you while we're talking about it. Of course, it's not on the right one. It's always the case. But here we go. Justin Lane, it just came in. He has just tested positive, or not tested positive, but he's on the COVID-19 list. So you're not allowed to say whether a player tested positive or whether they have COVID. We're not sure. All that we know is that Justin Lane is our second player now on that COVID list. So what are your reactions, at least for, how this list is working, and how do you feel as a fan seeing players go on this list, Zach?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of frustrating, but I guess I would much rather have them be on the list right now as opposed to in season.
Yeah.
I've been keeping up a lot with the MLB and NHL and NBA just to see how it's working. And honestly, the bubble thing has been working a lot better, it seems, in the NHL and NBA as opposed to Major League Baseball. So it kind of puts me on edge that the NFL is not going into a bubble, but they've still got some time to work out. I'm confident it'll get all situated before the season kicks off.
Yeah, and basically what means when you're on the COVID list, I know you have to be on there for at least 3 weeks or close to 3 weeks, and then you'll be allowed back on the team. Of course, Justin just joined Aaron Springs, who Brandon Wallace just reported earlier this week. He was the defensive back that we got from the XFL. So now there are 2 Steeler players officially on the reserve COVID-19 list. And moving forward, CJ Lester also had a nice article for all of us, which is actually some good news entering training camp. And that is the Steelers signed all of their members of the 2020 draft class. So everybody's in, everybody's ready for camp. Everybody's been taking their tests. So what does that mean to you to have all the newest players all ready for camp?
Yeah, it's definitely a weight off our shoulders. The last thing you wanted to hold out going into an off season like this. So having everybody ready to go, excited for the draft class. I know we didn't have a first round pick, but with the guys that we were able to get at the positions we were able to get, I'm excited.
Yep. And then we had another article out from Jordan DeFigio, like we were talking about before. And she stated that we just picked up a new tight end, Dax Raymond from the Chicago Bears. Now, Zach, one of the interesting things about this one for me was the Chicago Bears had 10 tight ends on their roster, which is just insane.
Yeah.
I mean, so essentially we got their 10th best tight end, I guess. Is it better than our 3rd or 4th best tight end? I don't know, but evidently the Steelers liked him enough, had enough scouting information on the guy that they brought him in.
Yeah, and in a shortened off season, especially when I think you'd rather have a couple veterans on the roster who have seen some live action before, as opposed to maybe trying to get a guy coming out of college, doesn't have any NFL experience. So hopefully he can come in, compete with Ebron and Vance and Gentry and make an impact. Yeah,
he was yet to play a game last year. I think he was on the practice squad for the Bears. He was drafted out of Utah State, 6'5", 255. So he's a big guy. He's the size guy, at least the Steelers like to have. Ran a 4.73 40. So there's some of his stats. Had some decent stats coming out. I mean, for his full career, 72 receptions, 873 yards, and 3 touchdowns. As you know, with the Steelers, though, anytime they're picking up a tight end, they're definitely picking up a guy that can block. So this is probably, definitely a guy that's going to be in there competing with Zach Gentry, with Kevin Rader as well. Obviously, Steelers just lost Christian Scotland Williams. who was a guy I loved. I mean, I absolutely like 6'9" guy that used to play rugby, athletic as hell. They were just trying to teach him how to block so he could get on the field. And the way that he left the game to me felt a little cryptic. Like maybe he was deciding to stay at home in the UK as opposed to coming to the US during COVID-19. So that may have been a factor with him not reporting this year and the Steelers cutting him. So it'll be interesting to see. Though, I mean, obviously he's done now, but we'll have to see how Dak's going to fit in this lineup.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And moving on, we also had some really, really sad news. Unfortunately, Steelers learned that their offensive guard, Carlton Hasselrig, passed away. And I wanted to at least bring up what, oh, wrong one. And of course, gotta stop sharing on that one. See, this is what I have to do. As I'm working, I'm also running the switcher. I'm doing everything.
Doing everything.
So I'm learning. It's kind of like my old radio days when you're like running the bumpers, you're bringing up all your like commercials and doing that, but it's all audio. It's much easier for that. I'm just trying to pick up the videos. I'm doing it. So now that I have the correct screen open, let's try sharing this one. So Brandon Wallace also had a nice little article remembering Carlton Hasselrig. If you guys don't remember him, I kind of grew up with Carlton Hasselrig, late 80s, early 90s. Huge, enormous offensive guard. Now, the interesting thing about him was he never played a down of football in college. He was a college wrestler and a championship wrestler. And a championship wrestler that won 6 college championships. Now, this is back when a Division II or Division III winner won their division for wrestling in their weight class, they were automatically given a berth into the NCAA Division I's to be able to compete on the Division I level. And that's what he did. He won the second Div 2 and Div 3, Div 2 and Div 1 for 3 years. So that's a huge accomplishment. I think since they've changed the rules, so you're not allowed to get moved up, which I think is unfortunate because when you have a talented guy like this, it got him known. People got to know who he was. He was such a great athletic guy that he ended up getting a training signed to the Steelers and into training camp there and ended up making a spot and becoming a Pro Bowl guard. So quite a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I always see the Steelers, it's something that with the organization from the beginning of time, they've always found these hole-in-the-wall players to come in and make a big impact. Maybe not the highest recruited or the most prestigious coming out of college, but this just speaks, volumes to what the organization continually does year after year.
And he's enormous. I mean, you can see right here in the picture, he's as wide as he is tall. And that's one of the things I always remembered about the guy. He just engulfed blockers, kind of like when he was wrestling people, he just engulfed everybody he was with in that unlimited class or the heavyweight class for wrestling. It's really sad to hear that he died at the age of 54. They said it was natural causes. So we wish his family the best. And obviously, our hearts go out, Steeler Nation, for losing one of their own and a great player and one that I remembered fondly.
Well said.
So now that we've got you on the cast as well, one of the big reasons to have you here is because we wanted to talk about all of this controversy between you and Hunter Homestead, who I usually have on these podcasts. And he's a huge Antonio Brown guy. I mean, I'm obviously a Hines Ward guy. Now, you growing up, when did you start watching the Steelers, Zach?
I was born in 95, so right around the 2000 decade, I started watching. So that was right at the beginning of Hines Ward's career, but I got it for pretty much the full time of his career. I've been watching the Steelers and beyond. So
yeah, but you wrote an article that we talked about on the podcast. It was the top 10 wide receivers of all time for the Steelers, and it generated a lot of buzz on Twitter. Obviously, Hunter was really upset about not necessarily that, because he's a big Antonio Brown guy. He's not necessarily upset that Antonio Brown wasn't the number one, though it would be Hunter's number one. I mean, I thought you had the number one right on the head. I think, honestly, I'm with you there. Hines Ward, number one receiver all time, has all the stats to prove it. Most catches, most receptions, most touchdowns, Super Bowl MVP. I mean, the guy, the hardest hitting receiver ever.
Yeah.
So to me, that was just like such. So I understand that, but Hunter really got triggered because not only was Antonio Brown not the number one for your list, but he wasn't even in the top 3. So you had the other 2 Hall of Famers, and then you had Antonio Brown as his number 4. So I want you to at least defend your side and talk about Antonio Brown first, and why he is a number 4 as opposed to a top 3 player.
Yeah. So basically, for me, what it came down to at the end was, all these things are so variable. What I think as a top receiver and what someone else thinks as a top receiver can vary. But when it came down to it, for me, I just looked at legacy. I looked at what did they do on the field to help the Steelers win championships. Unfortunately, Antonio Brown never was on a Super Bowl winning team with the Steelers, although, they made multiple runs into the playoffs, whether it be, defense was
2010 team, but obviously they didn't win that one.
Right. Yeah. So whether it be, obviously Hines played with the Steelers defense in the 2000s. That was just unbelievable. I think we're starting to get a defense that's replicating that a little bit more right now, but I know obviously the defense wasn't what it was in the 2000s when Antonio was on the team.
Yeah.
But just to make a long-winded answer short, I looked at stats, and then I looked at what did they do on the field? Were the Steelers successful when they were on the field? Obviously, Lynn Swann and John Stallworth each won 4 Super Bowls in the 70s during that dynasty. Both are Hall of Famers. Hines Ward, 2-time Super Bowl winner. We already talked about that. And I think he's, due up to be in Canton sometime soon. Hopefully, within the next couple of years.
I know that there's a logjam right now for receivers. Right now, the groundswell isn't there to make him a finalist, but I'm with you. I honestly believe that, Hines Ward will get his fair shake as well. So, but I think we have to get to the point where there's a little bit of lobbying for Hines Ward's case, for people to have to remember what kind of overall football player this guy was. I mean, not just a strict receiver. He was an excellent special teams player. That's how he made the team in the first place. But his blocking was unworldly. I mean, he changed the game as a wide receiver, because not only did they have to change the rules for the crackback block on interception returns, punt returns, and blocking downfield for his teammates to get into the end zone. I think he broke the jaw of that of Rivers, that old linebacker on the Cincinnati Bengals. That was a big way he changed the game. And for me, the other way that he changed the game was opposing players. Usually when they talk about the toughness of another team, they're usually talking about defensive players and what they can do. Our biggest rival, Baltimore Ravens, always chirping about Hines Ward, saying, dirtiest player in the game. They're always speaking out about him because they had to have their head on a swivel, because he's decleating Hall of Famers. He's knocking Ray Lewis on his butt. He's completely decleating Ed Ruhr, and the guy was just so great to have on their field, not just as a receiver, but as a blocker, and also for something the linebackers actually had to worry about a guy. Usually linebackers are, they're like, oh, I can't wait to hit this guy. I'm going to knock him out when he comes across the middle. And then they get knocked out. Right there's one, as I say it. So that's why, I loved growing up watching him. I'm with you. I'm a receiver guy. He's my all-time favorite receiver to watch too. Though, to speak back a little bit for Antonio Brown and his legacy as well, there was nobody as talented as a receiver, I think, that I've ever seen put on the black and gold than Antonio Brown. And I imagine that, if he was able to maintain his contract, maintain his mental stability, I mean, we might be discussing him being, a Hall of Famer this year, as opposed to him being out of football for a year. So that was, one of the craziest things that happened was obviously the way that he forced a trade, or he forced a cut for us to get rid of him, because Tomlin was finally trying to punish him, made him sit a meaningless game at the end of the season, and he couldn't take it. They'd affected his stats, and he's like, I'm never playing for you guys again. Turns out he never played for the Raiders, who we traded him to, and then he ended up only played for one game with the Patriots before he ended up getting cut from there as well. So I imagine his off-field issues and the way he left the Steelers also had to factor into your top 10 list, correct?
No, absolutely. Yeah. I tried to keep, obviously, my animosity about Antonio Brown out of what I was going, my rankings, but at the same time, it's hard to ignore what he did to the team. He wasn't the best teammate in the world. He wasn't the best, besides when he was getting the ball, was he doing what Hines Ward was doing? Was he helping getting other players open? Was he making great blocks, opening up running lanes? Those kind of things that help a team win. And obviously Hines won 2 Super Bowl championships. Those small things that he did, he elevated other guys on the field, other receivers on the field. He wasn't always the number one. And he was happy with that. And, Antonio, the one time that Juju started to step up, it just seemed like that was the end of him here in Pittsburgh, which was unfortunate.
Yeah, that was a great point. And I think it's the first time in 6 years that he wasn't number one in receptions and receiving yardage. And that was, even though he led the league in touchdowns that year, which is a huge feat, still had over 100 catches, still had over, right around 1,200 yards receiving. So you'd think that you'd be happy with that because you got a guy now on the other side of the field that, Juju had an insane year that year. And obviously it was a benefit for having Antonio Brown taking a lot of the coverage. But moving forward to show, hey, look, you can't cover Antonio Brown like that and expect to win because Juju's winning on the other side. So then you had to pick your poison thing. So that's the only thing that was unfortunate to me, that they weren't able to play for a few more years and really develop a rapport. Unfortunately, it seemed like he really lost it when the Steelers decided to name Juju the offensive MVP.
Yep.
Right before their last game of the season. That's when he seemed to snap. So, to me, it's a little bit immature. Obviously, there's no way to think that, the Steelers wouldn't be where they were without Antonio Brown that season or any season. It just became something I think that internally that he felt that he was disrespected because he wasn't seen as being a better player than Juju Smith, or it wasn't seen as being the team MVP over Juju Smith-Schuster.
Right. Yeah. It's an unfortunate the way it turned out. As I said, but I did a follow-up article just kind of debating Hines and AB. And as I said multiple times, he had one of the greatest 6-year runs for a wide receiver I think we'll ever see in NFL history. Yeah. All pro 4 times out of 6 years, made it to the Pro Bowl each time. But at the end of the day, what is his legacy going to be in Pittsburgh? And, when I look at Hines Ward and John Stallworth and Lynn Swann, I see 3 of the best receivers ever to play football. And Antonio Brown is up there as one of the best to ever play. But, when we look back at him in 10 to 15 years from now, what's his legacy ultimately going to be? And I don't think he will be viewed as the best receiver ever to play for the Steelers. Yeah,
unfortunately. And I agree with you. I think you hit the nail on the head there. Want to give a shout out quick to our people here at Steeler Nation watching us on our Steeler Nation YouTube channel. And that is Rodolfo Gigantana. He's saying what's up, and he wants to know about the Minka jersey. I know that we have a Minka jersey on our Twitter and Instagram, and also on our webpage as well at SteelerNation.com. You're supposed to jump on and follow Steeler Nation, is also Total Sports Entertainment, to be able to have a chance to win the Minka jersey. We don't know who won the jersey yet. I think that our partners at Total Sports Entertainment will tweet it out today. And if it hasn't come out already, it will come out very soon, because today is Wednesday, and Wednesday is always the day we end up picking those jerseys. So it's exciting. And thank you very much to Steeler Nation. Respond. This is what we're here for. This is why we vidcast live as we're doing the podcast. We obviously put the podcast up later so you can sit home and enjoy it at your leisure, listen to it when you're working or driving. That's always the way that people are working out, however people enjoy listening to podcasts. But now this is more fun to get some direct integration. And thanks for, at least letting us know what you're thinking so we can answer questions in real time, because that's the way we want the internet to work. So now that we've discussed your articles and stuff, now I want to get into training camp and get into a little bit more specific, Zach. And So training camp just started yesterday. And what I mean by training camp starting, the NFL and the NFLPA agreed that like when you first get to training camp, as opposed to like the first day was like orientation day, you kind of got there, put your stuff away, and then the next day you're out on the field. This time, first day you show up, you're actually getting a test. You can't step into the building yet. You get a COVID-19 test, and then you have to be away from the building for 3 days. So this is why we got our first report of Justin Lane going on the COVID list. Obviously, something is up, so he's placed on the COVID reserve list. And after these 3 days, I think on Friday, if everything is clean, they get another test. And then if that's clean, the next day they're playing football. So it looks like Saturday would be the earliest that they're at least going to start working out together, having meetings, getting able to hit the weight room together, maybe doing some drills. But we're actually not going to see real football in pads yet until about mid-August. So that is when the way that the NFLPA and the NFL have agreed to it, they're not going to hit pads until we hit halfway through August. So with no preseason games on the schedule, we're really not going to see a whole lot because obviously fans aren't allowed at training camp. Training camp's not even in Latrobe this year. It happens to be right there at Heinz Field. So what are your thoughts at least on training camp and how the Steelers are at least trying to get it off the ground this year and the NFL in general?
Yeah, so it's we touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's definitely a little weird this year.
Yeah.
I've never been to Latrobe, but I've always followed. What they go out there and you can listen to Steelers Nation. They do podcasts pretty much all day long, and I always listen to their takes on everything.
Yeah.
But it's definitely going to be different. Latrobe is a very historic thing for the Steelers, and for them to not be there for the first time since I think it was at least 50 plus years, they've been going to Latrobe. So I'm confident the Steelers organization is going to do fine. I'm a little worried for the rookies and the undrafted guys trying to prove themselves and make the team, but everybody's dealing with the same situation. So just make the best of it. And the Steelers typically always do.
Yeah. And to get at least to go in depth into the agreement, so all of Steeler Nation gets to know about this. So the agreement that the NFL and NFLPA made is, number one, we already discussed, no preseason games. They are all canceled. Testing starts on the 28th. It should last for 3 days. After that, players can start working out and practicing in the facility. So now and then moving forward, there's going to be, instead of a 10-man practice squad, there's going to be a 16-man practice squad. Also, now there is an opt-out clause. I know one of our buddies, Drink Iron City over at Steeler Nation, we were discussing on the forum site, and he wanted to know about what the opt-out clauses mean and how they work. And for this, a player can opt out one of two ways. One, they can just say, look, don't feel comfortable. I'm not going to play. There's no issues with them personally, but the NFL says, hey, if you don't want to play, it's fine. We're not going to force you to play. You get $150,000 stipend for the year. Your contract is on hold for a year. It's called your contract is tolling for a year. And that means that you don't accrue any more years. If you had another year left on your contract, or if you're going to become a free agent at the end of this year, you're going to now become a free agent at the end of next year. They essentially take that contract and they push it to next year. So that's what at least it makes to work out for anybody that just wants to opt out. And then there's a high risk category of also people that can opt out. And those are generally players that have some kind of physical condition that would exacerbate a problem if they get COVID-19. So if players have asthma, I know one of the players just opted out in the league that recovered from cancer because there were concerns that going through the chemotherapy process actually weakens your immune system and can make you more susceptible to the disease. And I know Steeler Nation was also discussing that a little bit yesterday. We were shooting back and forth. Is Connor going to be another one of those that opt out because he took chemo? But he said, no, I'm in the best shape of my life. There's no way I'm doing that. And so James, at least we know Connor's going to be playing this year, at least as long as we've got games. So he's not opting out. And then you've got 3 weeks now of strength and conditioning drills. Mid-August, like we said, starts the padded practice. And then financially, how this works out is the salary cap stays at $198.2 million this year, which is where it's been. There was some talk about trying to decrease it this year, but the NFLPA is like, no, we have the contracts. But moving forward for next year, it looks like the cap's going to go down, but at least the league and the Players Association have agreed to the maximum it can drop is the salary cap will drop to 175 million at the lowest that it could possibly be. With incentives, if this thing gets off the ground, if they have a good season, it could be above that. If the season gets canceled, they know at least it's going to be 175 million next year. So one of the things that I've been thinking out loud, and I haven't written an article on this yet, but I'll at least put it out there on the airwaves and use you as a soundboard too, Zach, is we understood that yesterday we heard of some players were starting to opt out. Now, an interesting thing that happened was there was a high percentage of New England Patriots players that started to opt out. So, there's one of two things that I'm just, coming up with my own brain because that's what I do. I think about weird things all the time. And one of the things is obviously they're going to be drafting a quarterback next year. They have less of their good players playing. They're probably going to lose more games. Not having Brady, that's a big thing too. It's a big quarterback draft class, and they're lucky they didn't lose their first round draft pick for cheating for stealing signals, but I digress. That's off my point. Going back on my point, the second point is if your contract tolls for this season, technically they don't pay that player's contract. So now if they have, 10 million that they were going to give to player X, and that player says, Hightower will take advantage because it seems like Hightower looks like he's going to opt out. And that's a perfect example. So he says, I'm not going to play. Now that means they are $10 million under the cap where they were because now they don't have to account for Hightower's contract this season, only his stipend. So now that they've got a difference that they can apply forward to next year if they have a big cap space. So if they end up being 20, 30 million under the cap, they can roll it over to next year. They automatically have a ton of money and they can pretty much sign whoever they want and do whatever they want. So always leave it up to New England to try to do something, not against the rules, but to kind of utilize the rules to the best of their ability to get the biggest advantage that they can. And to me, that sounds like it could be a big advantage. I mean, am I just like making stuff up here, Zach, or what are your thoughts on this?
No, I think anything that has to do with the Patriots, you have to be skeptical about. Having some of their top defensive players, I know Chung and Hightower so far were the two defense players that I saw that were out. And then I think Brandon Bolden and possibly their fullback Vitale is out. I know Bolden's more of like a third down guy for them, but he did do a little bit last year. The main thing that popped out to me was maybe these six people just needed a break from Belichick. I know he runs a pretty tight ship over there. So maybe they were like, I'll just take my $150,000 to $350,000 and take a break and come back next year and hope for the best. But no, I think it's awesome that the NFL is allowing players to do this. Obviously, you don't want to put anybody in a position where they feel like they're risking their health. I don't foresee – I think the deadline for opt-out is August 3rd, if I'm correct. So I'm hoping no Steelers players. I haven't heard any mentions of Steelers players who are thinking about opting out. But the more that want to opt out for the Patriots, the merrier. I'm happy for them to have less players, less starters, even though we don't play them this year. But
and also they don't have Brady anymore, obviously, too. That also, I might be just making this up. I mean, maybe Hightower in the defense and Chung, and they know like, hey, we don't have Brady this year. We're not going to be any good. I don't want to risk my life and risk my family. I'll just sit this year out. We'll see where the COVID stuff happens. Hopefully we'll have a vaccine come back next year. But going back to the point, maybe needing a break from Belichick. I mean, now we can start talking about their old tight end, Gronk, taking a year off of football and now coming back as a 95 rating on Madden and going down to Tampa Bay to join his buddy Brady. So I think you might have a point there, Zach.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And another thing that I'm really happy about having you on the podcast too is, since we're all writers, I get to go more in depth into your articles that you wrote for SteelerNation.com and get to hear kind of your reasonings behind things and talk about it a little bit more in depth too, so that our listeners can kind of hear your thoughts, because you've got some great commentary up there on the site. And one of the articles that you put up, you did an article on betting on the NFL Comeback Player of the Year. So can you walk us through what that article was to you, what players you think are in that conversation, and how you came to choosing those players?
Yeah, so it was actually a great segue talking about Rob Gronkowski, who I think is the second best odds right now. For me, sports betting's always been interesting to me. I usually do it on a weekly basis for the NFL. And then what I talked about was propositional bets. So they're a bet that you place at the beginning of the season that will or will not cash out at the end of the season. So you have to wait a while to find out if you're going to win. But the main reason I did comeback player of the year is because I was pretty passionate that Ben Roethlisberger stands the best chance to win it. And as of right now, he does have the best odds. So I think he was plus 350. It might have gone up a little bit because I think Cam Newton, since he signed with the Patriots, has pretty high odds as well. But the two players that I thought were possibly the best bets were not only Ben Roethlisberger, but Matthew Stafford. I think he was plus 850, meaning if you bet $100, you would win 850. He was having a really good season last year before he got injured. The Lions look like they've upgraded their offense a little bit, drafting a running back in the second round. I think they got DeAndre Swift. Hopefully they can finally get a good run game to balance out their pass game. But those two guys, when I do put my money down for my long-term bets, are going to be the two guys I would be betting on.
And I hear your money hitting the table already. You're ready to bet right now.
I am, yeah.
That's great. Also, you did an article too about talking about one of the most underrated players on the Steeler defense, obviously being Nelson. It was a beautiful article. So tell Steeler Nation on your thoughts on Nelson, his statistics, and what his game is essentially that makes the Steelers defense so dangerous.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the signing last season. So we obviously know the Steelers don't really make a lot of big splash free agency signings. So when they signed Steven Nelson to that pretty big contract last year, my relationship with the Steelers is just to trust them, trust what they do, trust the front office. It's worked for a long time. So when I saw the big contract they handed out to him, I thought, possibly this guy can be a cornerstone for our defense for a long time to come. And it seems like it's going to be that way. I know he was not viewed as the best player in the world when playing with the Chiefs. I think it had to do a lot with his schematics. He was targeted, I think, the most in the NFL in 2018. And then he came over to Pittsburgh, and he's just done nothing but produce since he's gotten here. When you look at the top cornerbacks in the NFL, you never see Steven Nelson in the conversation when you look at the national media. Yeah. But I think within my article, I compared him to Marcus Peters, Stephon Gilmore, and Marlon Humphrey, who were 3 all-pro players last year. And if you look at his stats without putting a name to the stats, Steven Nelson easily could have been an all-pro defensive back last year. So I was just passionate about getting his name out there, letting others know how great this guy is. He's a very quiet guy. You don't really see him showboating when he makes a big play, which is something that I really appreciate. And he's on a defense with a ton of great players. So his name doesn't really get mentioned, like I said, with the national media. So just given our platform, given the opportunity to really talk about a guy who is going to be making big plays for the Steelers for multiple years to come.
And it was really interesting too, that the point, I mean, it seemed like it was one of those normal under the radar pickup. Like, I wouldn't say under the radar because the Steelers did pay a lot for him. Usually when Steelers pick up a cornerback, they're usually picking up one of those guys right around the $3 to $5 million range who may or may not help out the team, might be a slot guy. The Steelers haven't had a whole lot of, success picking up those kind of guys. So they decided to spend a little bit more, $8 million range, bringing in Nelson. Fortunately, he got to get away from the Chiefs defense, where he was kind of like, it seemed like he was unfairly the person to blame for being a problem on that defense when they just couldn't stop plays. And even though he was a very successful cornerback, which is why the Steelers reached out and grabbed him. But obviously it looks like he's fitting into our system a lot better. He has another guy on the other side of him in Joe Hayden, who is just a phenomenal number 2 to have to take the pressure off of him as well, because now they can kind of balance out and to defend and match up against receivers how they see fit. But still, I mean, he did have that great safety and Barry on Kansas City, but now he's got Minkah Fitzpatrick. He didn't know he'd have Minkah joining last season. He ended up getting it, so that ended up being like a huge boon. But it was just one of those things. It seems like Kevin Colbert has been a little bit more aggressive lately in free agency, especially since we as Steeler fans understand that the Super Bowl window is starting to close. Ben's at the end of his career. We know he's got a lot less years ahead of him than he does behind him, maybe a few more good ones. But if we can give him as much talent as we can, I mean, it seems right now they're talented all over the ball. They've got great receivers, talented ball control receivers, bringing in Eric Ebron as well at tight end, bringing in all this talent at running back as well, especially I really love that draft pick too, with McFarland coming in and his ability to be a bell cow as well as being a guy that can just blow the doors off with his top end speed that we haven't had since Willie Parker. But it just seems that everything is starting to come together talent-wise, both offensively and defensively this season. And is there anything specifically that you see as well for the improvement of this team?
I always say we're one of the few teams that truly does build through the draft. So when I look at a pick that we make in the third or fourth round, I think the biggest one that I saw this year was Kevin Dotson. A guy who might not necessarily make an impact this year, but he's someone who will turn into a Chukwuekorfor or a BJ Finney, or someone who's just going to get a couple years to learn the system, learn how to play in the NFL, and then come in and make a significant impact. So, understandable that the window's closing, but I always stay confident. I try to take it a season at a time with the Steelers, and just hope that, our draft picks that we make and those middle round draft picks end up panning out for the next 5 to 10 years down the road.
Yeah, and now we're at the point of the podcast where we start taking questions from Steeler Nation. Thank you very much, Drink Iron City. He provided some good questions for us this week. He wanted us to know, at least, can you guys rehash the penalty for the Patriots filming of the Bungles, and more specific on how the Bungles protected and guaranteed action due of the original tape? And unfortunately, we don't have details on exactly what was seen and what was ruled on. The only thing that we know, at least through what I've read up on articles and researching when this thing happened in the first place, was they were caught filming the Bengals sideline while they were in the booth, I think. And when they were confronted, they ended up using the exact same excuses that Matt Walsh said they were going to use back at the first time they did. The Spygate, when that first hit, we're talking about back in the 2000s now, or 2007 or so. And it's always just say, oh, I didn't mean to do that. We'll just delete it, or you can take the tape. It's like, no, we're taking everything, give it to us, and we're going to inform the league. Crazy thing, though, being that they end up getting penalized less for a second infraction than they did the first time, which still just boggles my mind. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, like we said, with the Patriots, you always have to be skeptical about what they're doing. They're a great organization in terms of winning, but are they the most? Are they going to do things the right way? Most of the time, probably not.
Yeah. And then we've covered a couple more of his questions, but Drink Iron City's last question is, the Mahomes contract is uniquely set up to be cap friendly with guaranteed mechanisms. Do you see this as the type of contract catching on, as there is some protection for the team versus quality of play? What are your thoughts on that, Zach?
I think that contract's very unique in the fact that giving a guy that much money for that long of a period of time, I don't think we're going to see many contracts like that in the future. You're definitely not going to give that type of contract to a skill player outside of a quarterback, and you're very rarely going to give that to a defensive player, just based on injury risk associated with other positions besides quarterback. I think it's going to be interesting to see what they're going to do with Lamar Jackson. He's probably going to be next. And then I think Deshaun Watson and Dak Prescott. So do I think I'll see another contract like that for a while? Probably not. I think Mahomes is the exception to the rule, but I think they've got a great guy. And, I wish as a Steelers fan, we're sitting in that situation right now.
I know, right? But at least you hit the nail on the head too, because this is now the gold standard for young quarterback contracts. I mean, obviously Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league. He just won a Super Bowl. He just won Super Bowl MVP, did it all under the age of 25. I mean, that's phenomenal. Lock him up.
Right.
I think that every other quarterback now, like you mentioned, with Watson, with Jackson, with Prescott, they now see that as I should be getting about this too. This is the number that's because anytime league comes out and sets the bar, next man up wants to hit that bar. And I think it may create some really turbulent negotiations for these young quarterbacks when their contracts come up and they're trying to get, a long-term contract that looks out for their interests. Where I thought it would be, one of these 4-year contracts that might be paying them $40 million a year. Nope, 10 years. Half a billion. Like, absolutely crazy numbers. But I mean, more power to him. I mean, like I said, I can't say that isn't earned. It definitely is. The only thing that I don't know about the way this contract works is, I'm a contract guy. I do a lot of articles on, teaching people how the cap works and how contracts work versus the cap. I do know, at least the way contracts are set up, you cannot spread out the signing bonus over more than 4 years. And I think there may be, in some, you can do it to 5, but the signing bonus has to be within that period of time. I think it's probably 4. So if somebody signs like a 5-year contract, their signing bonus has to account for 4 years of that contract. And that's how the cap is affected. So if they got $40 million signing bonus on a 5-year contract, for the first 4 years of that contract, they have $10 million against the cap because that $40 million would divide equally into 4 years. And that's how the salary cap works. So
better you than me.
So yeah, so now that's why I'm just trying to wrap my head around $500 million and see how they can stay under the cap. I mean, obviously this seems to me like it's going to be a very high salary per season contract as opposed to being a big, payday on day one that a lot of these people get with these contracts with their signing bonus. So that's the only way that they could fit it under the cap within the rules that they have now, because you can't spread that out over 10 years. That's just not the way it works. I think hockey used to do that too. And they're like, you can't do that anymore, hockey. We got to spread it over a shorter amount of time, so we don't have these strange 10-year contracts pop up for these guys that have been in the league for like 12 years. But
right. Yeah, I think it's definitely going to put a lot of pressure on them to draft well as well.
Yeah.
They're obviously not going to be able to go out and make the big free agent splash signings that they have in the past. So hopefully I know they have a new GM and Andy Reid. They've been doing pretty well with drafting players the last couple of years, but I think it does put a lot of pressure on their front office here on out for the next 10 years.
Awesome. And Zach, you made it. You made it for your first podcast and vidcast with Steeler Nation. So I thank you so much for having us. Obviously, Steeler Nation, jump on SteelerNation.com. Read up on Zach's awesome articles. I mean, he's got a great mind. He's one of our, newest up and coming, fresh minded reporters. And we love having new, interesting perspectives every time for us all to read, because we do it because we love it. And this is why we're in this game. So reach out if you want to follow Zach on Twitter. He is at Zach Herbaugh. That's at ZachHerbaugh. Instagram is at ZHerbaugh13. That is at ZHerbaugh13. And Zach, once again, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I look forward to working with you again and having you back.
It was a blast, man. Thanks. Yeah, whenever you want me back, I'll be happy to come.
Sweet. Sweet. All right, Steeler Nation. You too can get yourself a unique gift this summer, lounging on the beach. Why don't you get one of the new t-shirts from SteelerNation.com gear page? We have every size and color choices. We got great graphics. So come on over for the unique gifts that only we have here at SteelerNation.com. We also are the best site for fast, unique Steelers content on the internet. Click the podcast button to listen to one of our many interviews, or click the forum button for the best football discussion on the interweb. Subscribe to the SteelerNation.com YouTube channel to be the first to know about our live vidcasts and video uploads. You can tweet us at Steeler Nation, Instagram us at SteelerNation.com, follow the Steeler Nation podcast on Twitter at _SN podcast, or follow me, your host, Stryker, at SN Stryker on Instagram and Twitter. Stryker is spelled with a Y. Thanks again, Steeler Nation, for joining us for your SteelerNation.com podcast and vidcast here on YouTube. I'm your host, G.Stryker, with Zach Herbaugh, rooting along with you as always. Go Steelers!